Welcome back into Live Now from Fox. I'm Austin Westfall. Let's get the latest on the Israel-Hamas war, and for that we bring in national security analyst and retired Marine intelligence officer Hal Kempfer. As always, Hal, it's good to see you. Let's get straight into the news. So the U.S. House Speaker Mike Johnson announced Thursday that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will soon give an address to a joint session of Congress. Johnson has not yet elaborated as to when Netanyahu's speech will be, but I gotta say, Hal, I saw BB making the rounds on U.S. TV stations this week as well. What could be the calculus here? Is the Israeli government trying to get a message out, does it seem?
Well, Austin, very much trying to get a message out, and of course trying to counter everything coming out of the International Criminal Court. As you know, the prosecutor over there is seeking a warrant for the arrest of Bibi Netanyahu and the foreign minister of Israel, along with Yahya Sinwar and another Hamas leader. Of course, this has caused great consternation with the United States and other countries, because it is basically in the same document has basically said they're equivalent, if you will, which is that this, the Prime Minister of Israel is the same with the with this Hamas terrorist leader. And of course, that's caused a lot of anger, a lot of frustration, especially in Israel. So this is a way to kind of counter that from a strategic communication standpoint. It's also a way to kind of filter out, if you will, some of the reporting coming out of the Gaza Strip. There's been some success in the Gaza Strip. There's been a lot of setbacks, obviously, with aid and other things. So it's a way to let Netanyahu and let Israel itself, if you will, explain what they are doing to a joint session. I'm really kind of surprised when I saw this pop up, because I didn't have a sense of how that back and forth between Johnson and Schumer was going, and I'm still not quite sure what the total agreement is in terms of representation or how they're going to do that.
And we still do not have an exact date on when that speech will take place, but we'll be watching closely as always. So I want to discuss an editorial that you and I were discussing offline by the Wall Street Journal. It's titled, "The Israelis Prove Biden Wrong on Rafah." The editorial highlighted what it called Israeli's successful evacuation of 950,000 civilians from Rafah, despite months of opposition from the Biden administration. Hal, I remember hearing from U.S. officials that Israel had no credible plan for protecting civilians. From the evacuation efforts that we've seen so far in Rafah, does it feel like this would have met the U.S.'s expectations? Is it too early to tell?
You phrased that perfectly. Look, this is what it does. It gets them out of the way, all right? And in that regard, it's successful, and they got them out of harm's way where the combat action is going to take place. I just looked just before we went on the air, and the last report I saw, it looks like they're right around maybe over 1 million of the Palestinian refugees, which actually means that they have pretty much moved all the refugees out. And if you take it, just working the math, because the city itself was about a little less than 300,000 before the war kicked off. So I don't know, exactly who's still left, and it's not saying that those who are permanent residents stayed and those who are refugees all left and what that mix was. But it does say, in terms of raw numbers, they kind of moved those refugees, that big chunk of people out of the Rafah area. And they also did something rather interesting in moving them out. Yeah, they did the leaflets, they did the texting, the cell phone calls, all the stuff that is you put into classic influence operations, communications, whatever it is to get out there. But the way they prosecuted this campaign is much slower, much more, to use the IDF phrase, much more precise, if you will, in terms of targeting. But it's a very deliberate, slow campaign, putting pressure on not just Hamas with the negotiations, which we've talked about on the air, but also putting pressure on the Palestinians who are there, many of whom have moved 3 or 4 times before this, and weren't really that enthusiastic about picking up stakes and moving again. It did it in a way that it seems to be fairly successful in getting them out of there. Now, of course, the rhetoric, I should say, or the narrative is turned, if you will, from the U.S., and the U.S. is saying, okay, but what about the day after? And of course, that day after discussion, that's a whole other issue, because that's being said not just by the White House, but that's being done everywhere, which is what is the long-term plan.
So we'll discuss the day after in a little bit here, but I want to continue on with this evacuation effort. This photo is from the UN. They say the population at UN facilities in Khan Yunis alone has increased by 36% as people have moved from Rafah. Does Khan Yunis appear to be the quote-unquote humanitarian island that Israel long talked about, or are there more places for people to seek refuge at this point?
Well, Khan Yunis, if you look at that humanitarian area that they set up, it's kind of north of Rafah. It's got a big chunk of the urban area of Khan Yunis in it, and it kind of shoots out to the beach, if you will, shoots out to the coastline. So yes, Khan Yunis is a big part of that evacuation area. I am not at all surprised when they say 36% or 30% or 40%. I wouldn't be surprised if you saw double the number of people that are moving into that area. And you got to remember, Khan Yunis still occasionally has some relatively smaller combat action that goes on here and there, but it was just recently an area that had very intense combat action. So it is that part of that thing that certainly going back to the beginning of the war that we discussed, quite a bit was, okay, you can move people south, but at some point they got to move north. And this is the first time in the war that they've actually been moving people north, and wasn't the way I foresaw that it would probably be done, but it is getting done, and they've moved a lot of people out of Rafah and out of where the major combat operations are.
So there's another thing I want to touch on here. So let's pull up this tweet. We want to talk about the IDF incursion into Rafah. Israeli tanks this week advanced in Rafah's southeast, edging toward the city's western district of Yibna, and continued to operate in 3 eastern suburbs as well, according to locals who spoke with Reuters. Israel has said that it has no choice but to attack Rafah to root out the last battalions of Hamas fighters it believes are sheltering there. This is a good time to remind the audience, Hal, what exactly are these battalions made of? What kind of infrastructure are they housed in? Are we talking tunnels? Are we talking something else? Do we even know?
Well, we don't know. A battalion in and of itself is usually somewhere between 400 to 800 troops. Okay, and these are fairly light troops. You're not seeing them with mechanized vehicles. If they have vehicles or light vehicles, they don't have tanks or anything like that. They have they're lightly armed. They're light infantry would be the best way to describe it. And yes, they are in tunnels. They hide in buildings. They hide in what we used to call, or still do call, kind of spider hole things, where they're kind of dug in. They pop out and they take advantage of it. And they're using a lot of classic guerrilla warfare insurgent tactics, along with regular urban warfare type of thing, in defending their positions. Of course, they have this massive underground complex, and it's every time you try to describe it, words kind of fail me, because they spent so many years, put so much effort into these huge reinforced concrete tunnels that basically run throughout Rafah and throughout the Gaza Strip. That's where you're seeing them, and of course, the challenge they have, and this is a challenge that the IDF is facing, is as you clear an area on the ground because of that tunnel complex. And this is something that the U.S. ran into a lot in World War II on these Japanese-held islands throughout the Pacific. They'll pop up behind you. And there's the same issue we ran into in Vietnam. You clear an area on the ground, they go through the tunnels, and they'll pop up behind you or hit you on a flank. So that's part of the challenge, and that's why the IDF is moving deliberately. But as you mentioned, they've got tanks going in there now, so they're using armor, which says that term major combat operations is certainly underway.
It was just over a week ago that we heard Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. He spoke during an impassioned speech calling for his own government to formulate a day-after plan for Gaza. Now that some time has passed, where does that conversation stand? Of course, we're going to be anxiously waiting to see what exactly Netanyahu says to a joint session of Congress, but what have been some of the discussions about the day-after plan in the week after that speech was made?
Well, it's been, certainly the controversy has not died down at all on the international stage, and certainly a number of world leaders have brought up the day-after issue. Of course, Yoav Gallant saying that really brought it up in a way that very few could actually bring that issue to the forefront. and he has not in any way backed down from that. Now, interestingly, and I think it's kind of tied to it, is the War Cabinet has basically voted to have the negotiators go back and rekindle the hostage negotiations. This is as we were just talking about those major combat operations down there, and I think that War Cabinet vote, and the War Cabinet's different than Netanyahu's regular coalition political cabinet. It's not so far to the right. You have a lot of more moderate voices within there. And for them to say this is indicating that they may have taken on at least part of what Yoav Gallant said, but in a far broader fashion within the government, saying, hey, we need to move on this day after thing. We need to look at the end state, as we say in military doctrine. What is this going to look like? And by the way, all of this is happening at the same time. Jake Sullivan has been working hard on this agreement with Saudi Arabia, which is going to be fairly earth-shaking in terms of how it realigns the Middle East. And that offer is out there by the Saudi government, which basically says, now he didn't use the term day after, but he said, hey, look, you figure out how this ends up with a Palestinian state, and we can normalize relations. And of course, that's a tectonic shift politically, militarily, in the Middle East. So there's a lot of movement that you see right in front of you, and then there's a lot of stuff that you see it, but it's kind of there. It's part of the fabric of what's going on. And then of course there's a lot of discussions that we are not privy to between world leaders and stuff, and I think that's part of what we're seeing as well.
All right, Hal, we'll leave it there for now. As always, we appreciate your analysis. Take care and talk soon.
Okay, thank you, Austin.
All right, let's slide away for our final commercial break of the hour. We're back in 2 minutes.